Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Vintage Motocross Q&A. I'm sorry, Vintage Motocross Radio. I am your host, Joe Abadi. Welcome to the show. It's almost 11 o'clock in Pasadena and 2 o'clock in Patterson. In a moment, my guest will be Mr. Barry Higgins. Whether you're listening on your phone or on your computer, please take a moment to share the show with your friends on Facebook or on YouTube. This program, of course, is made possible with the help of our sponsors, Northwest Maico CZ. For all your Maico and CZ parts, please contact Alan Brown. Preston Petty Products, the legend continues. Amsoil, the first in synthetic oil since 1973. Full Circle Racing, for all your rims, spokes, lacing, and truing, please see Full Circle Racing and my good friend Tom McAllister. Vinco, keep the ride going with over 650 products in their catalog. Motion Pro for specialized tools, cables, and controls. Who has the largest lineup in motorcycling today? From minis to road bikes, motocrossers to adventure bikes, be sure to visit your local KTM dealer or visit them online at ktm.com. I'd also like to thank Selvaraj and Aranyana for his assistance with getting my guest to be on the show today. And also congratulate Team Gas Gas with Justin Barsha and his amazing win last night in Houston. Also, hats off to Christian Craig for the wonderful job he did in the 250 class. My guest today was the first motocross rider in America to receive a paycheck as a full-time rider. In 1969, he was considered to be the top American motocross rider and was the envy of many young racers. His career spanned for over 10 years as he represented manufacturers such as Maico, OSA, Yankee, CZ, Montesa, Husqvarna, and KTM. When the very first race happened at Unadilla in 1969, he was on the gate that day and won both classes. We'll be talking more about that in just a moment. After his success on the track, he became a KTM dealer in Georgia for over 28 years, where he helped many of the KTM amateur riders move up through the ranks. And he also worked with the KTM Junior Supercross Challenge program. It's my pleasure to have as my guest this morning, Mr. Barry Higgins. Barry, are you with me?
Yes, I am.
Thanks for joining me this morning, Barry.
You're welcome. I'm glad to do it.
You know, Barry, I feel like I have a great connection with you because we are both from the great state of New Jersey.
Great state of New Jersey?
It is. It is, Barry. It is in many, many ways. And I know you've been out of there a long time, and so have I. But again, when I think about those days, the first question that really came to mind when I was working on the program was, me being from that state, and so were you. I'd like to tell me where you got most of your riding experience and what bikes you began riding on as a youngster back then.
Well, the first bike I had was a 125 PSA. When I got out of grammar school, my dad that summer we had been building a house for 3 years by then, and my dad, when I got out of grammar school, he bought me this PSA, and our house was on a dirt road in the woods up in North Jersey, and we started riding. I started riding then, and then one thing led to another. And funny story about that is we brought the bike home and we pulled in the backyard of the house, and my mom's, like most of the houses up north, the back of the house was out of the ground. The front was kind of eagle with a big basement. My mom's hanging clothes up on the line, and my dad and I pull up in the pickup truck, and the bike's in the back. And my mom looks down off the porch. She goes, "What's that?" And my dad goes, "Oh, it's a motorcycle. I bought it for Barry, so he's got something to do this summer to keep him out of trouble." She goes, "You take that thing back. He's not riding no motorcycle. He's going to get hurt." The usual mom stuff. My dad, backing that up a little bit, my dad rode a motorcycle all through World War II back and forth to work in Patterson, New Jersey, from our house in Kinnelon. And he decided to try something out in the backyard of the house where he was living with my grandmother then, and on his Indian 45, and hit a big rock, went over the bars, got 2 black eyes, and blah blah blah, broke a bunch of stuff, and showed up at the hospital to pick my mom up from having my sister, who was 3 years older than me, with 2 black eyes, his arm in a sling and all that. And all the people were going, "You should be in the wheelchair instead of that lady." So, but we showed up. My dad goes, "Well, we can't take the bike back. They're closed now," which was a lie because the shop was open like 7 days a week, and it was 9 to 9 Monday through Friday, and 9 to 4 or something on Saturday and Sunday. So, needless to say, the bike came out of the truck. We started riding it around the house and stuff, and it never went back. So that was a $75 motorcycle that's probably started my career at racing dirt bikes and stuff.
Now, Barry, wasn't your dad was he a BSA dealer too?
No. The
Okay.
dealership was a place in Wayne called the Sports Spot, which is where I ended up working when my sophomore year in high school. I'd cut class and get out of there and hitchhike down to Wayne and work at the shop. So
I remember the Sports Spot. And so, how old were you when you worked there, and what were some of your jobs around the shop?
Well, I started there just pretty much putting motorcycles together, taking them out of the crate, putting them together, servicing them, and doing that. And at like 13 or 14 years old or whatever it was, and then I started working on bikes. I've been working on cars and trucks and this and that we had where we lived. I always had a junk car or truck or something to drive around in the woods that I had to keep fixing. So I learned a little bit about mechanics. Plus, my dad did that too on the side. So we did that, and that's I worked at that shop in the summertime. My dad, before I had a license, my dad had dropped me off in the morning at 7:30. I had a key to get in the workshop. Go in the back of the workshop and start working on bikes, or if I didn't have anything to do right then, I'd get one of the used bikes out of one of the sheds in the back or something we had back there, and I'd go riding because right behind us was a huge amount of woods and stuff from where we actually went some enduro stuff there. So, it was a good experience.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me to my next question, Barry. Is when did you first compete in an enduro or some type of organized event?
Well, my first organized event was a trials up in North Jersey, and when we used to be able to go ride just about anywhere up there, and it was a trials. I was still on the 125 BSA, and I got third in the lightweight class at the trials, and then my dad had a Triumph Terrier, which is a little 4-stroke 150, and it was he made it into kind of a dual sport bike. It had, a trials tire on the back and whatever, and I rode the class for the road. They actually had a class for road bikes, and I won the trials in the road class overall on the Triumph. Didn't even have a driver's license yet. So
how old were you, Barry, at that event?
13.
Wow.
So, my mom, the next step in that thing of riding and stuff was my mom said I could ride woods events and this and that, but my dad's like, okay, So we went. There was a club at the Sports Spot, and it was called the Sports Spot Riders. And anyway, we had a motocross or scrambles track, as it was, up on the top of a mountain up in northern, just into New York, and up by Greenwood Lake, and called Hobo Hill. And my dad and I and my future brother-in-law, who also worked at the BSA shop with me, we went up there to watch, and the guy that owned the shop, Bob Maico, rode a 100cc Zundap up there that he was testing for Berliner Motor Corporation. And so he came over and asked my dad, he said, hey, will you let Barry ride this in the 200 class? And don't forget, this is a 100cc, and it's a street bike too. And so my dad goes, yeah, okay, let him ride. And I was ecstatic to do that. So we went up to the concession stand, got some pie plates, and taped them on, one over the headlight and a couple in the back, and put some hokey number on it with a magic marker or something, and went out and raced it. And in the 200 two-stroke class, got, I don't know, 7th or 8th or whatever it was, on it. About, I don't know, 2 or 3 months later, we're at my house, and like I said, my future brother-in-law, Frank Hearn, was filming the race up there on his 8mm camera and stuff, and we're at my house, and my sister, my mother, and him, and all were going to watch this movie about that, and we're watching the movie, and I go by on the little Zundap, and you could see it was me, and my mom looks at my dad and goes, "Does that Barry ride that motorcycle?" So we were busted right then and there for that. So
the cat was out of the proverbial bag at that point, huh?
Yeah, we were, and after that, she just kind of gave up on trying to stop my dad and I from doing racing and stuff like that, and riding every day I could.
Sure. Well, Barry, your career moved along pretty quickly, and you were actually the first sponsored motocross rider in America. Tell us how that came about and who you were riding for at that time.
Well, I was, at that particular time, this was, to start out at the beginning, what I was doing when motocross came to this country, when Hallman came in '66.
Yeah.
I was working, at a shop and all that, and hanging around doing that. And I remember Hallman came to the West Coast at first, and then the next thing he was coming east. And I was talking to Sal, and we were on the phone actually with Dick Bencourt up in New England, another dealer, and they're going, "Oh, wait till he comes here." So anyway, he came. I was kind of racing with him for both of the motos, in the 500 class, and then next couple years I rode a few of the Trans Ams, and then '68, '69 I was the top American in both of those series, at the end of it.
Yeah.
So I had a friend that worked for OSA, and he called me up one day and said, "Would you like to come up to Schenectady and talk to us about riding for us next year?" And I was like, "Sure," So I went up, and they offered me a job of getting paid, and and having a van and some parts and a bike and a credit card, and that was it. I signed up with them and rode the OSAs for a couple of years.
How much did they pay you, Barry?
It was it's funny, you see the contracts now, they're like 15 pages long. This was one page on a piece of notebook paper that said, the blah blah blah, full works rider gets the bikes and parts, and it was $125 a week. I got paid as my salary, plus all my expenses and bikes and parts and that kind of stuff. So and it was it wasn't much, but back then I started going to every place that paid money, and it's pretty much traveling around, going here, there, and everywhere.
So tell us about those events, Barry. Where did you go? Was it a northeast kind of a circuit that you followed, and was there a mechanic with you? What happened?
No, it was wherever I happened to. Cycle News back then was the Bible of where do you go on the weekend. That's who's paying money. At the events, normally those old Cycle News would have 2 or 3 pages of what's going on and where and this and that, and then some ads and stuff. So I just go from one place to another, making where I figured I could make some money at it. I'd go do that.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the OSA motorcycles and how you. Well, what comes to mind, I guess, Barry, is when I think of OSAs and that time period in America in motocross, names like Ward Robinson and Joe Bolger come to mind. Were you crossing paths with those guys at that point?
Well, back before we were actually, when we were running, you remember this, I had already been racing when Hallman came here, and that's when they really started paying us money to do it, little that it was. But in that period before that time, there was just scrambles basically, and we'd go to the scrambles, and I saw, all those New England guys and stuff, were, I raced mostly the scrambles races. I raced mostly around New York and some Pennsylvania, tracks and things like that. And then, I ventured out eventually to New England. So I ran into, Joe Bolger, Bruce McGuire, and a bunch of guys. And later on, Jimmy Weiner, who, I became pretty good friends with, and so, that all built up to Hallman showing up in '66, and then the motocross started, and then when they started that, they started paying money at a bunch of the tracks, and everybody was trying to run a motocross in their backyard. So I pretty much jump in the van, and I lived in the Dodge van on and off for 3 years.
Wow.
So
now, in 1969, on Father's Day to be exact, you raced at the very first race, the first event at Unadilla. What do you remember about that day? How many races were you involved in?
Well, it was, that, that was the first place I showed up that other than, Grafton, Vermont used to have what they called a motocross, which really was, other than they ran it on a scrambles type format. But, I showed up at Unadilla and looked at that place, and it's huge, and there's just grassy hills and big dips and big stuff. And I'm like, wow, this is going to be fun. So at that period of time, they weren't running 25 or 30 different classes like they do now in an event. If I remember correctly, there was only a 250 amateur expert and 500 amateur expert, and it was 3 30-minute plus 2-lap motos. And, I, before I hit the proverbial wall, I won 5 of the 6 motos. So
5 out of 6 in 250 and 500?
Yeah, well, there was 3 motos for the 250 class and 3 motos for the 500 class. And there was only amateur and expert, so there was about maybe 30 minutes between each moto. They run like 250 amateur, then 250 expert, and then 500 amateur, 500 expert. So it was a bit of riding. So
at that point, were there Europeans at that event?
No, it was still basically a local event. That was later on. There was, and when I started riding the OSA and everything from up there, Schenectady, Unadilla was where I used to go to practice. We built a practice track out in the back field back there where the amateur track is now.
Mm-hmm.
So when I went up there and rode, and that track, it evolved a little bit. I'd help Ward with the track every now and then, and then originally that track was laid out by Dick Mann and Mick Andrews, who both Dick worked for Yankee for quite a while, and then Mick was over, doing trial schools and riding an occasional motocross. So they basically laid it out, and I think Mick showed up there one time, and rode, at Unadilla before we started having real pro races there.
Okay.
So,
Well,
so
so motocross is in its infancy in America at that time, and Europeans really weren't here yet. I mean, who were some of your influences when it came to riding? Did you see? I mean, did you watch Mick Andrews ride? Did you watch Dick Mann ride? Who were some guys maybe you stole some of your style from, so to speak?
well, I was, both those guys were Mick and Dick Mann are just a few years older than me, and by the time I met those people, I mean, I was like almost the same age as them. So, the only guy and I never raced against them until the Trans Ams and Interams and stuff that I paid a lot of attention to was when I was a kid was Jeff Smith, because I worked in a VSA shop. I rode VSAs. And you know, he was always in, I'd wait till one of the cycle magazines came in that had the European report, and I'd always watch for him and see what he did and this and that, and like I said, I never really got to race with him until the Interams came along when the VSA team would show up. But I think my all-time hero, as you might call it, would be Dick Mann, because the guy showed up. If there was a race, he showed up and rode it.
Yeah, he was there.
He didn't care if it was a road race, a motocross, a short track, an enduro, whatever. And he'd show up, and I got to be really good friends with him. He actually offered to quit racing, and we were going to go to Europe and ride, international races and GPs, but John wouldn't let him go from Yankee, so that plan went away. So
now, in a minute, we are going to be talking about your trip to Europe, but I want to know. Tell me what the next 2 years brought for you in racing after Unadilla that day, and did you stay with OSA for those next couple of years?
Well, I stayed at the end of the Trans Am series in '69. There was, I think, 11 races or something, and I was the top American in the first 9, straight. And so I got a little bit of attention. So that's what kind of led up to the OSA deal.
Okay.
And then I got the OSA deal and started riding, the places that paid money. And then in '71, the Florida series started, when they decided to do that down here and bring some of the, pro guys, and everybody showed up for those things, so, I mean, there was, it seemed like there was more people from California and Florida than there was Florida people then. So, and that was pretty interesting thing. I mean, you had to qualify every single week for the pro class, not, and the amateur classes were over the top with the amount of riders that showed up for them.
You've ridden, Barry. You've ridden for so many different manufacturers, but I do want to talk about what I think is probably the most rare and the most unusual bike you ever raced, the Yankee. When did you first get involved with Yankee, and did you have a lot to do with the development of that bike? Tell us more about the Yankee motorcycle.
Well, during my time at OSA, and at Yankee, that was the time that that Dick Mann was also working there. Basically, they started him with the Yankee twin thing. He designed the frame and some stuff for that. And he was really good at doing frame things and all. And so we did some stuff with the OSA stilettos and stuff when I was there. And then we built like 3 prototypes, which eventually turned into the Phantom, which was his frame design and stuff that we built the bikes out of. And then the single project came along after I had already left there, because it was the year after I had been riding, 2 years after I'd been riding the Grand Prix and stuff. So John called me and wanted to know if I wanted to, I was basically just riding a privateer CZ then with a little help from CZ and stuff. So I said, yeah, and I went up there and went pretty much back to work with them doing tests on that.
Now, when you say John, Barry, we're talking about John Barclay?
No, John Taylor.
Oh, John Taylor. Okay.
He was the guy that owned Yankee Motor Company.
Okay.
And the importer for OSAs. So.
And what was that bike like to ride, the Yankee, the Twin? Tell us a little bit more about that.
The Twin was, by the time that actually got into production, it was already obsolete, because being a Spanish manufacturer and dealing with Spain and all with that, they worked at their own speed, which was slow.
Yeah.
And the Twin was, if it had came out in the original time it was supposed to, it probably would have been a hit. The Twin was, that thing was, we built one of those things that was you could take the two it was basically two OSA motors hooked together with a sprocket in the middle between the two motors. It had an ignition on each side, and it had basically a primary chain that drove the transmission and the clutch and all. But you could take the couplers apart on that thing, and you could make it fire as most of the Japanese twin cylinder two strokes were 180 degrees, with one piston up, one piston down, that made them rev quicker and all that. So we built one of those. OSAs like that, put street tires on it, and a little tiny sprocket on the back of it, and some wildfire pipes on TT bike cylinders and carbs and all on it. And took it out on the cross town, whatever it was, interstate. There was a little thing, and we'd see how fast it would go. And Paul Dean drove John's Ferrari Dino that he had, and I rode the Yankee, and we clocked that thing at over 140 miles an hour.
Wow.
So on tires that were good for 60.
Yeah.
So but the Twin was, I rode it at 6 days.
Barry, hang on 1 second. Sorry.
It was a handful. It was heavy, and it was.
So you rode that at the 6 day trials event, which was where?
It was in Czechoslovakia, a place called I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it correctly. Spindleroof Milan. It was one of the Czech cities that had 6 days. Actually, I rode there about 4 times, I think, with that at that same place.
Okay, so that kind of brings us up to maybe 1971, where was it Brian Kenny who convinced you and John Barclay to go to Europe to race? And what events did you compete in there other than that Czechoslovakian ISDT?
Well, that was basically the American motocross team was what they called it. And it was Dan Gurney was the guy behind that, who had interest in motorcycles and off-road racing and things, and Brian was over there I think he went to school over there, and he raced over there for a few years before any of us showed up, and there was some guys before me. Russ Darnell went over there, and Mark Blackwell, and some people were all over there riding, and so he was kind of the captain of the team, and finally I don't even remember who it was. I got a call that said, "Do you want to go over there?" Because there were, and ride. One of my interviews in Cycle News that they did is, and there was some guys, and I didn't even know Brian then, but the people they were sending over, and I was like, they don't send anybody over there to worth a damn, they should, get somebody, and and so anyway, at some point in time, I got a call, and I had to give up the OSA ride and get I picked up a CZ over there at the factory, and and rode the CZ, and we just kind of traveled around in the, that's a, you talk about works bikes and this and that and riders and all, I was right at home before I left to go there. I just traveled around in the Dodge van all the time. And over there, they had a VW bus, or panel truck or whatever. Me and my girlfriend and the CZ lived in that Volkswagen for like 4 months.
Is that how long you were there for, Barry, all told? 4 months, or were you there longer?
Well, I was just for riding the GPs. I was there for like 3/4 of the season, all the way up to the end of it when we rode the motocross destinations. John Barkley just happened to be a guy that was over there riding, and Brian ran across him somewhere, so we were, he was part of the team, and then the fourth member of the team was Gunnar Lindstrom, who had an American license because he was living in America, but he was in Europe at the time, when he came down to that, and we ended up recruiting him for the fourth guy because somebody didn't show up for it. And I hear stories it was supposed to be Sonny DeFeo, but I don't know whether that, and I never really asked Sonny if it was or not. But,
okay. So, now you've ridden so many different brands of bikes, Barry. The Osa, the Yankee, the Maico, KTM. The one that does always stick out in my mind, though, is that CZ, the white one that had Ghost painted on the tank. The name, I think, of course, is synonymous with Sonny DeFeo and Ghost Motorcycles out in Port Jeff, Long Island. How did Port Washington? I'm sorry. How did the Ghost deal come about, and how long did you ride a CZ for?
Well, the Ghost deal actually started when I was there. I was kind of a little racing, kind of not, but I got a telegram one day from one of those, Western Union telegram that, had stop after it didn't have a period at the end of the sentence.
Yeah.
And it said, if you would like to ride a Victor GP at Walden, stop, please call, this number, stop, and talk to Sal, stop, and all that. So I got on the phone and called him up. And he said, we'll bring the bike up to Walden, which was a scrambles track that was just up in lower upstate New York, I guess you would call it. So, and then I went up there and started riding the GP Victor, for him, and one thing led to another, and then I had a 650 BSA twin that I raced too, which I was pretty used to because that's one of the bikes that I had a 500 version of that before that. So and then one thing led to another, and then we rode the BSAs on and off for about a year, and then the CZ started coming around and stuff, and I had a twin port CZ 250 that we rode, and there was New England and all of that, Jersey being the place that it was, you couldn't have a race in Jersey, so we always went up to upstate New York and New England, and we had some really good stuff going up there. There was north-south races, east-west, Canada, New England, and all that stuff was going on back then, and so the CZs came along, and that seemed to be the bike of choice, for that.
So for how long did you ride for Ghost and the DeFeos?
That was like 66, or no, it was before that. It was like 65, I guess, when the Victor first came, the Victor GP first came out.
So you were on CZ before you were up with Osa?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
okay. Okay.
Yeah. So and I rode the CZ, and then the CZ was, I went out to California and rode a couple of events in '68 on the twin port 250, and then I started riding a single port one the next year, and rode all the local things. And the Ghost was famous for showing up with a truckload of bikes, and everybody, he had a bunch of people riding for him and all, and that was a good time. So,
Yeah.
so it was, I ended up working for Sal part time, when in between races, and going to the races and doing stuff around the shop and working, picking up bikes and doing this and that.
Have you spoken to Sonny recently? When was the last time you spoke to Sonny DeFeo?
It's been a while ago. I talk to him, on and off every now and then. Sal's still around. He's 93 years old, still riding his Harley, around, and I see him. And I saw him, Sonny, a few years ago at one of the rewinds at Unadilla, and like I said, I talk to him every now and then, but he was busy raising a family and trying to make a living. And
sure,
the only state I think that's worse than New Jersey with trying to live there is New York.
There's no question about it. And not to get off the subject, people say to me, well, Joe, you live in California. What about taxes? What about this? What about that? And I tell them, I lived in New York and New Jersey. There's nothing California can ever do to me. Nothing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, well, that's me too. That's like I said before, Jersey's a good place to be from, far away from.
Barry, one bike that has a lot of mystique around it. There's always stories surrounding it. People say they've seen them, they haven't seen them. And, if you ask 10 people, you get 20 different stories. What can you tell me about the Maico 760? Did you own it? And was that the same bike Rick Simon rode in Blackwater?
Yeah, yes and yes.
Okay.
I owned it when Maico closed their doors in Suffolk at the time. And I had been working and riding Maicos for a while, and I went up there, and this German guy by the name of Otto Weyer. We were the last two people in Maico, and Sel gave us each a shopping cart and a notepad and said, "Get what you want before we put this stuff all in a container." So I ended up buying a bunch of bikes that were there that were buybacks from dealers and this and that. And the next thing, and the 760 was one of them. And I was kind of interested in that bike because I had seen it, and I actually have a couple of pictures of it. And I'm sure Sel probably told you about the history of that with, the guy that made it and all of that. It was a rivalry between Egbert Haas and I can't remember the BMW guy that rode the BMWs at 6 days, and Egbert always it was always Herbie Scheck, the BMW rider. Herbie and him were always rivals, from riding. They both rode big motorcycles, but anyway, they had to make the 760 to get it in the over 750 class, and that's how it came about. So they did that.
So when you got that bike, Barry, it was in one piece, or you put it? How did that come about? It was a complete bike when you got it.
Yes, it was a 81 490 frame, and it was the 760 motor. It was actually the 760 motor that Egbert rode in the 6 days, because when I had it, it still had the green paint marks on the cases and stuff from where he had rode it at the 6 days the year before.
Now, Rick Simon rode that bike too, correct?
Well, he attempted to ride it.
Okay. What happened there?
Just, nobody hardly could start the thing, seemed like, and he rode it at Blackwater, which had to be the worst place in the world to try out a bike that you had never ridden before. So, and one that was difficult to start, and it required a whole different technique of riding it and all. So
I heard that bike was sold for an incredible amount of money.
No, that's to move on to the next question.
Well, I'll ask you.
The money that you showed me on that you sent on the things we're talking.
Yeah. Yeah. Hang on. Are you there, Bruce? Wait. Let's back up a second because I missed part of that conversation. There was a call coming in. Yeah, I did send you an overview of some of the things I wanted to talk about, and the last question was, I heard the bike sold for an incredible amount of money. You said not to discuss that. You wanted to move on. I'll just ask you this: were you the guy who sold the bike?
Yes.
Okay. Then we'll leave it at that. Now, you had a stint with Montesa too, didn't you? You rode Montesa for a while.
No, I actually didn't. That's another one of the things that I did. I was the test dummy for Cycle News East for a while for the dirt bikes, and that's how the Montesa thing came about. Because there's a couple pictures of me doing, riding the Montesa. Was a test bike, that they had, and I rode. I never raced it. I just rode it a couple times at our practice place while we did the test on it.
I see. Okay. So Barry, was there ever a contract that you were offered from any manufacturer that you turned down?
There wasn't any real offers because back when that really started, the first actual kind of sponsorship I had was from BSA, and it was your usual, the back door thing. If I needed parts, they'd give it to me, and I was at BSA all the time picking up bikes for the sports spot. So, and I got to know those guys pretty well down there in the service department. And I don't know if you remember a guy by the name of Wally, we called him Wally Brown. His dad, Walter Brown, ran BSA in Nutley, and Wally was the hot rod guy out in Pennsylvania at all like the TT scrambles and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Him and I got to race against one another quite a bit. And when I was riding the BSA Twin, he'd give me some parts and some things, but there was the only real contract I really ever had was with OSA. Everything else, I got some help from CZ for a while, and I had another one of my New York buddies was sort of my manager. When I was doing that, we went over to CZ and finally talked them out of some little bit of money and some bikes and some parts and stuff. So
okay.
But,
you mentioned a name a little bit earlier. You mentioned Jimmy Weinert. Who were some of the other guys that you were friendly with off the track back in those days?
I was, we hung out like, Jimmy, another story about Jimmy. He was, he's 8 or 9 years younger than me. And then when I was still riding the BSA Twin at Maybrook, he shows up at my dad's and I were a pickup truck, and I guess he has a couple of older brothers. There was Al and another one,
Kenny,
and he shows up in my pits, and he's this little kid, which I was too, but he was a lot younger than me. Even then, he goes, "Wow, why don't you ride that BSA? My dad's Triumphs and this and that, and I'm like looking at him like, I just won. I beat your dad's Triumphs and your brother and all of that stuff. Get out of my pit. Go away." So, but him and I got to, we were riding CZs. He started showing up in New England when the motocross stuff started around, and we had some battles, for a long time. He was, him and I in New England, the qualifying events at Pepperell one year, there was two 30-minute motos in each 250 and 500 for people to expert guys to qualify. And Jimmy and I, both 250 motos, Jimmy and I weren't more than 3 feet apart from one another for the whole time of that 30-minute moto. And it's kind of funny because was a picture in Cycle Sport magazine of me and him. I'm in a T-shirt and I have goggles on. Jimmy had a full face, a face shield, open face helmet with swept back bars, like he would ride short track with. And,
Right.
And there's the two of us out there racing, and you look at what people wear nowadays.
Hey Barry, who was Crazy Tony from your scrambles days?
Yeah. Well, there was a guy that was he wasn't Crazy Tony. He was Tony the Animal.
Oh, okay.
They called him. He was one of the guys that hung around in New York and knew some
Unsavory people. That question just popped in from I know an old friend of yours, a good friend of yours, Gary DePietro. So he just typed that in, and I want to thank Gary for sending in some great pictures of him and Barry as well. But I got him.
Yeah, there's speaking in New York and that I got a message from New Jersey for you too. You'll probably know who it's from.
Who's that?
Who's watching Pomeroy?
Oh, Bruce Roundsville. Yeah. We went to a couple of races, and Pomeroy was always with us, and we were all hanging out one day, and he always kind of needed some attention, or he'd get into some kind of mischief or whatever. And Bruce and I looked at each other, and I said, well, if we're both here, who's watching Pomeroy? And we never forgot that. Bruce is good people. I got several people that wanted to know, and they were very, very grateful for this, about an organizing of a race in Alabama called the Run and Brand GP. Were you promoting races? Were you promoting races at the time too, Barry? And what was the Run and Brand GP? What was it all about?
Well, I didn't really promote it, but I laid out the track out there in Center Alabama, and it was promoted as a twin shock Grand Prix, vintage bikes, and we pretty much raced motocross like it was motocross.
Mm-hmm.
Back we just had an all natural track. Eventually we had a starting gate eventually, and then the name you just mentioned before, Gary, he came down and rode quite a bit there too, and we had the king of I'm jumping the start.
Right.
So, but yeah, it was on a 90-acre piece of property that was 2 hills with a little stream running down the center of it, and the far hill from where the start was and everything had been all terraced from being farmed years and years and years ago. So we ran the track all up through there and across the stream, and once in and once back, and some big hills and off cameras and all grass.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, people loved that place, and we ran that thing for like 10 years. So, and the entries started to drop off, because we had 2 races there. We had one at Run and Brand, and then they had one at the CDC farm that was John Garman owned 2 or 3 big pieces of property there. And we have in the springtime, we'd have Run and Brand. In the fall, we'd have the CDC race, so, and both were all natural terrain and all grass to start with. So.
Okay. Yeah, it was a lot of people asked me about it. They were very grateful for the track the way it was, and I knew you had something to do with that. I just wanted to bring that up during our conversation. You had some time aboard. Obviously you were a KTM dealer later on, but tell me about your time riding for KTM and what events did you do for them?
Well, pretty much, I was, people ask me all the time, what was your plan, when you started out to do this and do that, and when, my plan was and still is, there is no plan, I just, I did whatever, being the dumbass kid that I was, I did whatever I thought I wanted to do, you know, and so I, you know, and thus that probably cost me some, you know, some bad feelings, let's say, you know, about stuff. So, but it was, you know, it was a good time, you know. I mean, we just rode and went here and went there, and I always went to wherever I could make some money.
When were you riding? When were you riding a KTM? What years?
Well, I started riding in '81. I rode. I was still riding a 490 Maico, and then Rod Bush at KTM gave me a 250 KTM. That was the first year of their single shock motocross one. He said, "Here, ride this and do this and try that," you know, and so which I did, you know, and I rode it with, you know, with some success. I was always a better 500 rider, but I started riding then, and then I rode, you know, I rode enduros and hare scrambles and motocrosses and desert races and all that stuff for them. And you know, back when there was those 4-stroke nationals, I rode a few of those on a 4-stroke KTM and helped them do some development work and stuff. I had a farm up in Georgia that was like 60 acres, and it had 2,200 acres of woods behind it. So they used to come and do final suspension and jetting stuff on the pre-production bikes at my farm for a few years. So
okay,
got to do that and ride that. But, you know, I never rode 6 days on one though, but I did. You know, I did motocrosses, and I actually have a trophy on top of my little cabinet out there that KTM Austria gave me because I won more events in 1 year than anybody else in KTM.
Wow.
So,
They've come a long way, and they've got an incredible lineup of bikes, which leads me to my next question. Barry, you eventually became a KTM dealer. When did you start to sell KTMs?
well, before the KTM, this is when I started being a dealer on my own, was actually with Maico.
Okay.
And I came back from 6 days in October, and I had been riding Maicos. I actually worked for Maicos. I was when Cell came over here and was working for Maico. When the factory took it over, they hired me as a sales and service rep, and then I went racing also with them. And you know, one thing led to another, and you know, we went, you know, and I helped do a lot of the Maico stuff with the race teams and 6 days and this and that, and so and sell, you know, to back that up even a little more, I met Cell at the Maico factory when I was riding GPs.
Okay.
And then I rode, I rode a Maico a little bit at the GPs now and then, and Cell came over and helped me in Switzerland when I got knocked off the track by a Husqvarna rider. And anyway, he came over and helped me straighten the brake pedal out. And then in St. Anthony's at the last race of the GPs that year, the CZ was seasoned up and doing all kinds of things. So he ended up, and then I started, you know, riding Maico back here and all. And he set me up as a Maico service center I was at my house, actually in the carport. And so we ended up, you know, in about less than 4 months, I was the largest Maico dealer in the country, which I was from that day till they shut the place down. You know. And in the meantime, in '81, I picked up KTMs and started selling those, and you know, thus I was the biggest KTM dealer at times in the world for like 17 years. So,
and that was in Georgia, you know, Barry?
Yeah. Yep.
What you did some things with kids too. You were helping amateur riders for KTM. What exactly were you doing with the kids, and whose career was involved there?
Well, with a little bit of KTM, most of the stuff I did with helping, riders and stuff before I even was actually working for KTM for a while.
Oh,
I did, I did like Randy Hawkins, who was, became national enduro champion when he was riding a Husky. I built his Huskies, and I took him to his first 2-day qualifier on 125 Husky, and then I helped Kevin Hines and and a bunch of different guys. In 6 days, I was kind of like the team manager for when we were riding Maicos at 6 days and all. So
okay. So when did you stop being a KTM dealer?
I sold a dealership in 2006.
Okay. And that
which was I wouldn't want to be a dealer nowadays.
Why is that?
So, well, just because of all the, when I started out, throughout all my working at motorcycle shops and working for motorcycle companies, it was a fun job. It was fun, and Maico was basically a family-owned thing. KTM was a family-owned company, and my shop was the local hangout for wayward racers for a long time.
Okay.
So now there's so many rules and regulations, and you can't do this and you can't do that, and it's just it's kind of.
It's not like the old days. It's not like the old days, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's not the kind of environment. I'm glad I'm retired.
I got you. I understand. So, talking about the new days versus the old days makes me want to ask you about the current crop of riders. And do you watch Supercross? Do you enjoy that kind of action?
Yeah, I've watched the Supercrosses and stuff, and the one thing that I'm not good at is being a spectator.
Oh.
And that's kind of the thing. I watch the Supercross, I watch the outdoor races and all, but that was what was so good about when I started doing the KJSE stuff, which was the little 50s and stuff with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
I had to pretty much talk my way into doing that with Cell. And Cell had started that program a while back, and we did it. I basically came to a couple races just to help out, and then I started doing a bunch of them, and it's it's the whole reason we all started doing this, because it's fun. And the kids, you'd see the kids, and they'd be, the kids would be in a stadium that, a lot of them you would never see in a stadium ever again, and that's something that stuck with them forever.
Yeah.
The first time they rolled out into a stadium on a motorcycle, and I've watched those kids go from, 8 to 10 or 8 to 9 and all that, all the way up into their 20s and 30s now, so. And
would you,
something,
Yeah. Would you change anything about the sport and the way it runs today, as far as Supercross or outdoor series? Would you change anything about that if you could?
No, it is what it is. When we started this, and when I started racing for money and all of that stuff, it before the money came, and even the first few years, we were all kind of good buddies, that hung around at the nationals and enduros and all of that stuff, and then the good thing about the Supercross and all of that is it got people that had nothing to do with motorcycles to watch it.
Yes.
And it helped to get rid of the Hells Angels mystique that motorcycle racing had.
I agree.
and they brought a lot of people into the sport that probably never would have done it if it hadn't have been for for that. I mean, once it started getting televised and it started to pick up things. I mean, back even in the early days of the Supercrosses when I was riding them, you couldn't get on. You couldn't pay your way onto a TV station to get an interview or do anything. I mean, nobody. They would never have it on the news. They'd have, Billy Joe Ray Bubba Bob played golf today, and didn't matter that there was 15,000 people at the stadium watching a Supercross. Nobody wanted to know about that.
Yeah. No, I agree with you 100% on that. And I see some people complain about it and they say, well, it's not motocross, it's not this, it's not that. But it has brought a lot of attention. It has brought it mainstream. It does get on TV now. And I think that's a really good thing. Now,
well, it's not motocross, it's Supercross.
Right. It's a different thing altogether.
That's the whole thing, I mean, it's a spin-off of what motocross started. I mean, and motocross is a spin-off of scrambles from in this country, so I mean, it's part of the evolution. Some of the things, I mean, to me, it'll be June of this year. It'll be 61 years I've been riding motorcycles and racing, and I've seen all of that stuff go through from nothing to something to back to nothing and back up again. In the motorcycling world, and it's just part of the evolution of it, and hopefully it'll get better. I mean, if you had been at the Minios this year, you could have saw how much better it has gotten. So
yeah.
So
now I'm sorry. Go on.
Well, Minios, there was rumored 5,500 entries at the motocross for that place. When's the last time you saw 5,500 entries at anything?
Yeah, you're right. So, somebody sent in a question, and it pertains to somebody that we lost in the motocross world this week. We lost Joe Robert, and it was very, very sad. Somebody sent in a question, and I'm always careful about this because sometimes I've had guests on where people send a question in over Facebook as I'm doing it, and it doesn't always pan out. But this one pertains to Joel fixing a carburetor in Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
How did that happen, and what were the tools that the late Joel Robert used?
Well, you people that didn't know him knew him. Didn't know him. He was out there, let's say. But
yeah.
He was complaining about the bike didn't run too well and blah 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 and this and that. And the next thing and they checks, it's okay, it's you, it's not the bike, and this and that. So finally, he had some trouble with it at the races for some reason, and he threw the thing down in front of the judges, the FIM building there, which wasn't really a building, it was probably an easy up or something, and ran back to the pits, got a hammer, broke the carb off of the thing, smashed the cylinder and everything, and walked off.
Joe Robert. And Gary DiPietro tells me that you were involved in horseback riding as well. Do you still have horses?
No. No.
Did you have a bad experience with a horse almost taking your head off or something?
No, I had a couple of times the horses. There isn't an on-off switch on those.
Right.
So I pitched off on my head, kicked in the face a couple times, and a couple things, But that was when we had the farm. My ex-wife was gonna make us rich, from breeding horses and all that, which didn't happen.
Well, Barry, we're coming to the end of the show, and I just wanted to know if there's anyone else out there you'd like to acknowledge or thank for anything that may be going on, or mention any events that might be coming up.
Well, there's so many. When you do this for ever and ever and ever, basically, which it seems like we're doing. I mean,
Hmm.
there's a lot of people you meet and do this and do that, and everything, and the stuff. I'm just, I'm lucky with the people that I came to know from KTM. Robert, and he's pretty much Robert Pierce is the guy that kind of keeps me around there, to do this stuff with the amateur racing, which I'm a part of it, the service thing, and and then there's guys that just keep me and help me out with a little of this, and then Bruce, who you talked to before,
Sure.
that was his CZ that I rode for a whole season. He just showed up and being the nice guy that he is. He loaned me that bike and brought it to the races and everything. And I mean that was a good time. That was, like I said, that was what we started doing this for, was to go have a good time. So.
And it's come it's come a long way, and I'm really really grateful that that the vintage motocross scene really cropped up, and that maybe hopefully the younger riders today who are doing a phenomenal job, but they'll know more about the history of this sport, and that's what really that's what really matters.
Just you were back going back a little ways. You mentioned Joel Robert and stuff, and I in the '69 when we were riding the CZs and all, I traveled around to all events pretty much with those guys, with him and Roger and Jerry Stadoka and Victor and everybody, in the thing. And at the first event in Pepperell, they had like a thing to meet the riders or something like that, and I think it was at the Holiday Inn, and they have like the ballroom or whatever they called it. Joel and I happened to be sitting out at the lobby right by the doors, and people kept coming up to us and asking us, like, how much is it to get in? How much is it to get in? And, oh no, it's free, And then I kind of looked at Joel and I go, hey, let's try something. So the next people that came up, we said, it's $2 to get in. And I think we collected almost $80 before everybody stopped coming in, that we split up. And that was that. So you never pass up a chance to make some money.
No, and that's America. And when Joel probably saw that opportunity, he said, "Why not?" Right?
Right. That's it. So, but it's the things that went on, back when that all started was, like I said, it was especially with the Trans-Ams and the Inter-Ams. I mean, those guys were all here on vacation, and we were all here trying to impress everybody, So, and and you get a lot of good memories, and in the end, that's pretty much what you're going to leave here with.
Yeah, that's true, Barry. And you've created a lot of great memories. You have a lot of adoring fans out there. So many people from the Northeast were excited that I was going to be doing this interview with you today, and you didn't disappoint them, I'm sure.
There's lots more. You just can't say it on the air.
Yeah, Brad Lackey has an old saying: the best stories could never be told.
Yep, that's true.
Barry Higgins, thank you for taking the time to speak to me today, and I'll be in touch with you.
Okay, well, anytime. Give me a holler.
I will, Barry. Thanks again.
Bye
for now.
Bye.
My guest this morning on Vintage Motocross Radio has been Barry Higgins. I hope everybody enjoyed our time together here this morning. I want to thank, of course, my sponsors who helped put this show on, and also our Vintage Motocross Q&A show on Wednesdays. I want to thank Northwest Maico CZ. For all your Maico and CZ parts, please contact Alan Brown. Preston Petty Products, the legend continues. Thank you, Paul and Patty Stannard, for all you do to help us here on the show. Amsoil, Russell Waters, thank you so much. First in synthetic oil since 1973, but there's so many other wonderful products that Amsoil does produce, and you should go check them out online whenever you get an opportunity. Tom McAllister and Full Circle Racing, for all your rim spokes, lacing, and truing needs for both vintage and modern, be sure to check out Full Circle Racing. Vintco, keep the ride going with over 650 products in their catalog. Motion Pro, for specialized tools, cables, and controls. And once again, I do want to thank Selvaraj Narayana for putting us together, putting Barry and I together this morning for this great interview. Again, congratulations on the debut of Gas last night and Justin Barsha. What a great race that was. So thank you all for tuning in today to Vintage Motocross Radio. I will be on again Wednesday night at Vintage Motocross Q&A. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks once again for joining us.